Hey, before I kick off the podcast, I just want to shout out Next Door Clothing. Next Door, a clothing brand based out of Bondi in Sydney. They're making really nice jeans and shirts and hats. So go and check out their full range at nextdoorsydney.com. They're also artists, so you can go and check out a range of art. They put on rad parties, and I love what they're doing. So nextdoorsydney.com for the full range.
I'm having a good time.
You are?
Yeah.
I can tell.
We are rolling too.
Terrible happy talks. Terrible happy talks. Terrible happy talks. Terrible happy talks. Today's guest is Esther Milanzi Ubuntu. Esther is a creative writer, educator, traveller, wife to her husband Angelo, and, as she describes, someone who radiates breadcrumbs for other creatives. Esther, you're going to have to explain that to me later. She's the co-founder of the Surat Warrior Writers group in Thailand. She conducts weekly creative writing workshops and writers groups here in Bali. She is passionate about building a community of creatives and cultivating alternative ways for people to connect other than just partying. Esther is currently a superstar educator at the globally recognised Green School Bali. She is a black, South African and half Caucasian American who has spent most of her life in America with her mother and two sisters. Esther was estranged from her biological father, who was deported from the US when she was 3 years old. The opportunity to visit the birthplace of humanity, Africa, arrived after she finished graduate school from Florida State University with a degree in international education development. Esther was then awarded a Fulbright grant to teach leadership and literacy skills at FET College in Vereeniging. You know, we practiced that and I knew I was going to blow it. Anyway, let's keep going. South Africa. This was an Afrikaans town 40 minutes south of Johannesburg. Esther's travelling experiences and blogging while doing so became an unintentional journal of her healing journey. It has helped her to develop a deeper understanding of the post-apartheid racial climate, and it has given her a sense of closure after visiting her father's gravesite 23 years later. Esther's travel journey of self-realisation also led her to meeting her paternal family, including a younger brother and sister. It was with this connection that she received from her cousin her South African name, Ubuntu, which means humanity. Today, Esther is with me to share her experiences, challenges, strength, and hopes for the future. Esther Milanzi Ubuntu, welcome.
Thanks so much, Shannon.
I got through it.
Yeah.
Wow, like what a bio. I mean, you shared a lot of that information with me, and I guess like you would have probably revised that before you shared it with me. Like, how do you feel when you hear all those things about your life and where you're at?
Sometimes it feels a little surreal.
Yeah.
I think in the moments of doing, I don't realize how much I'm doing until I'm reflecting on it later.
It's funny. It's like that saying, like, you know, hindsight's always 20/20. It becomes more clear and you get more clarity. But I really like how your African name, like Ubuntu, means humanity, because like in the time I've known you, like I've always sensed like you have like this innate sense of empathy for everyone you meet, like almost like a champion of the people just by default. Mm-hmm. Have you ever been described like that before?
Yeah, I'm realizing more and more that in all of my different roles, both professional and personal, I become an advocate for people. And so when my cousin Mulanga gave me that name, he actually didn't even tell me that it meant humanity. He told me that the meaning was I am who I am because of who we all are, which I loved that. And I feel like everyone I meet does help me. They help me become who I am. Yeah. And they change me.
Interesting. Like when you met your cousin who gave you the name, like what was that experience like?
It was life-changing. I was only in South Africa for 10 months and I cried for 4 weeks before I left because I just learned so much about my roots and about, you know, different parts of myself that I didn't even know existed. I think leaving America, it was really important for me that South Africa was the first place that I lived outside of America, and I could really question my own conditioning in a way that was really authentic and felt right. And I was around people who had grown up knowing about me, and they could help me answer some questions about my father and answer some questions about parts of myself that I'd always recognized and seen, but didn't necessarily know where that came from, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. Like prior to that, though, like growing up, was it just a burning desire to discover that and learn about that from an early age, or
no,
did
not
it
at
come
all.
later?
It came way later. It actually came from my international relations teacher, she was also my, so in grade 10, she was my world history teacher. Her name is Miss Davidson, and she's still like my champion in world Shiro today. We're friends on Facebook, and I tell her all the time how much she changed my life. But she taught me in world history in grade 10, and then in grade 12, she taught international relations to students who were really interested in learning about the world. And she had us do this roots and nationality project where we had to trace our heritage. And I'd known about my biological father, but I'd never really thought to reach out to him. And in this project, I decided to reach out to one of my uncles who lived in Canada, and he put me in touch with my biological father. And so I talked to him for the first time when I was 18. Wow. And just the conversation, it was like maybe 2 minutes and on the phone. And he called me from South Africa, and we talked about him being a Muslim, and we talked about me having a little brother that I didn't know about. And we talked about how he still loved me and he missed me. And it was that first conversation that was both a desire to learn more, but also kind of a fear. I actually decided I didn't want to pursue that relationship.
Why?
I think it was a fear of the unknown, and a fear of Muslim culture, a fear of a paternal relationship with this person who had just kind of always been a story in my life versus an actual human being. And at that time, I was really into Christianity, and I was afraid of what questions I might have to answer about myself by getting to know him.
Was there a sense of like healing, though, despite those fears? In that first conversation? In that first conversation, there was a lot of release. I cried a lot, but it was difficult to explain what those emotions were. And I think the first emotion I had was actually anger, because he wasn't in my life. And I think I blamed him for that. Was it his fault? No, definitely not. And it wasn't his fault or my mom's fault. It was, circumstances. Do you mind if I ask why he was deported from the USA? So that is actually still a question to me. I think that story is different from every person I've asked. So it's still something that I'm trying to understand. And it's part of why when I started writing magical realism, I'm able to kind of explore those different answers that I've gotten to help me explain and understand for myself. Yeah, right. So growing up as a young child, was there another male role model in your life? Yeah, Jason Wilburn. It was actually my mom's high school sweetheart. They met in Egypt. Nice. My grandfather on my mom's side was a Middle Eastern history professor in Egypt, but American. And my stepdad, Jason, his parents were diplomats in Egypt. Gotcha. And so my parents went to the same school, Cairo American College, and they met. They ran track together and played in the band and fell in love. But back then in the 80s, they didn't have social media. They didn't have a way to contact each other once my grandfather left to go back to the States. So they broke up. My mom met my biological father in college. They got married, had myself and my sister Zuri, and then they got the divorce and he moved out of the country, and Jason came back into my mom's life, and then they had my youngest sister Jasmine, and he's who I've always known as my father. Mm-hmm. Do you feel that like once they had your younger sister Jasmine, was she maybe like really integral in like connecting the family and maybe solidifying the family unit? Of course, yeah. Like I'm not to say that it wasn't already solid, and I'm just sort of speaking from experience because I've noticed that in my life with various extended family members, when a new child is brought into the family, it actually heals a lot of past hurts amongst family members. It's really interesting. It's like the new child sort of melts away any past resentments or pain. Maybe I'm wrong. It's just an observation.
Yeah, I feel like Jasmine unknowingly has been the glue for our family in a lot of different ways. Even right now, she's one of the youngest grandchildren, and she just had the first great-grandchild.
Yeah.
And our grandfather on my mom's side just passed away this year in July. And it was a lot of hurt for our family. And she brought forth the first new life since he passed. And it's just been really beautiful. His name is Mason, and I'm going to go visit in December and get to meet him. And it's just, after my accident and after my grandfather's passed, this year has been a really intense year for everybody in my family. And this is just a wonderful thing to celebrate life. Yeah.
So, I've heard so many people over the last couple of weeks say, this last year's been so intense. And then there was someone at school talking yesterday. They're like, Mercury's in retrograde and we've had a few full moons. And I'll be honest with you, prior to moving to Bali, I was just like, what is that shit? I'm not like, whatever. But now I'm listening. I'm like, okay, so just tell me more about Mercury. Like,
you're talking to the right person. My accident actually happened on the day of a full moon.
And I want to talk about that. Are you okay with talking?
Yeah,
so tell us about the last month or last 2 months of your life. It's been very interesting.
Yeah. You've
had a lot of people very worried about you. Like, what happened?
So a month ago on October 13th, which was on a full moon, I was coming home from a really beautiful detox day. I went to the beach. I actually got rerouted from my house I was going to this yin yoga class, and I had my GPS in my ears, and I was listening to a podcast, and I was on my way down, and because of the full moon and because it's right before rainy season, all the weddings were happening in Bali. And so my GPS kept rerouting me, and the Banjar neighborhoods were in the streets rerouting people. And so I ended up going from a 30-minute drive to about an hour and a half. And it took me all the way to Sese Beach, which is really far from where my yin yoga class was, but it's also really just a chill, beautiful space with less tourists, beautiful ocean. And I just sat on the beach and meditated and did some journaling, and it was just really beautiful. And then I met up with some friends. We got a massage, we had dinner, and I drove home 30 minutes, no problem. And when I got to the house, there was a dog sitting outside the gate. And Lo and I had just gotten a kitten, Bamboo, who you got to meet when you got here. And we had just let him start going outside. And I was worried that the dog was going to come in and get Bamboo because he's so little and he doesn't really know how to jump yet. So I was kind of worried that the dog would come in. So I got off of my bike to open the gate, but I kept my bike on and revved it a little bit. The dog backed up a little bit, but then he kept kind of coming forward. Normally when you rev your bike at dogs, they kind of go away. So I kept it on as I drove the bike in, no longer on the bike. So revving it gives it way more power when you're not on it. And it literally flew me into the wall. And I smashed my forehead into the wall and fell backwards. And luckily I was still wearing my helmet, so I didn't actually sustain any injuries to the back of my head or to my brain. But Lo was in the shower when this happened and runs out because he could hear me yell for help. But I mean, the thing that he thought of was he's in the shower. He could hear the gate opening. He's thinking I'm going to be home in like a minute, you know? And just how quickly that changed. Like he heard the crash and my yell. So
just to clarify, because I know how trigger happy those accelerators can be on those automatic scooters. Yeah. And I have the same problem all the time. I have a mechanism where it turns itself on and off like a stop start for traffic to save petrol. But then sometimes you don't know it's on and then next thing, And I hear about similar accidents like that all the time. So you had the helmet on, but you still hit your forehead directly on the wall?
Yeah, so my helmet never fit properly because of my dreadlocks. So it would always go right to the top of my hairline, which meant my forehead was always exposed.
Okay. Okay, so then you hit the wall.
Yeah, I hit the wall. And all of our neighbors also. Open. Yeah. Well, it was a very tiny cut, actually. But there was so much blood that my Lo and my neighbors didn't actually know how much damage was done. So our neighbors got a car. They asked us to get in, and they were telling Lo to get on his motorbike to follow us to the hospital. And I was like, no. I was completely lucid. And I was like, no, Lo needs to go in the car with me. And they were like, okay. And in the car, he was like, I'm really glad that you said that. Like, I was not in the right, he was not in the right state of mind to drive, obviously. And I just wanted him to be there with me. The hospital's about 5-10 minutes away. So it didn't take us long to get there, but it is like your local hospital. They didn't have a CAT scan. The bed that I was on didn't have, it didn't have a sheet on it. I was like out and exposed. They cleaned me up and they saw that it was a really tiny cut. So they gave me stitches. And because I was lucid and didn't have any nausea, they were like, okay, we can send you home. Here's some pain meds. Here's some antibiotics. But if you start to feel sick or if you start to feel pain, go and get a CAT scan. So Lo and I being exhausted, seeing that for the most part, I'm okay. We went home. All of the next day, we just rested. I iced it. And then the next morning when I woke up, my eyes were so swollen, I couldn't see. We were like, we need to get a CAT scan. And then we saw that I had a depression fracture on my sinus, and it was like going in. And they were like, you need to get surgery. And so that's when all this stuff happened. And we hadn't told anybody yet because we were like, oh, it's fine. We didn't want our family and friends to worry. And then when we got the news that I had to have surgery, we were like, okay, we might need to start telling people. Yeah.
So
it's a lot.
It's a lot. And I do need to share something in a minute, which is very odd. But so basically you're having swelling on the brain.
Swelling.
There
was
swelling,
some fluid.
Swelling of the brain?
Fluid, not of the brain. So it was fluid, I guess, like in my sinus area. So then that was draining to my eyes.
Okay. And so then you had a surgery.
I had a surgery. So What
did that involve?
Well, it was quite a process getting even to figure out what to get done.
Bali?
In Bali. A lot of people were recommending that I go to Singapore, and I was considering that because they said I was safe to fly. But safe versus comfortable are two different things. And the director of our school came and sat with Lo and I at the hospital and went and basically talked to all the different surgeons with us, talked about all of our options, and really advocated for us to get the best care possible. And that was really invaluable. I think Lo and I, as we were going to the hospital each time, we were like, we need an adult. And he was an adultier adult than we were. So that was really nice to have that support. And the surgeons seemed like it was a really routine procedure. My brain hadn't been affected. It was just to put a metal or a titanium mesh on my sinus and to fix my deviated septum. They had to cut a line at the top of my head and pull my face down, which feels and sounds really scary.
And for those of you listening, I've seen this. I've actually seen the scar, and it's gnarly.
Yeah.
Like, it's a big scar.
Yeah.
I mean, lucky it's under your hairline. And
that's the whole thing. He was like, I'm going to do it under your hairline so that way you don't have that scar showing. And at first it was like, oh my gosh, this is so intense. But then, he's a plastic surgeon. He's done it for other things before. And minimal, recovery period and all that kind of stuff. So we decided to go for it. And I was in the hospital for 5 days afterwards. And we had an amazing support of friends and family here that, we just had people coming to visit and people bringing us food and making sure we didn't have to worry about anything. And that was it was really nice for both myself and my family back home, not having to worry about, what is that care after the surgery going to look like? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is. And it never ceases to amaze me how much humans, when they know someone is in need, how much they band together, and sometimes it's sad that it has to happen in the extreme situations for people to show that side of themselves.
Yeah.
And I was just, as you were telling me this story, I just started doing some maths in my head, and when I first arrived to Bali, my wife had a motorbike accident.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Literally within a week of your one a year before.
Oof.
And when you make these decisions to live in a developing country, and you were talking about trying to make a decision about flying to Singapore and things like that, it does really make you realize the potential gravity of the situation you're in,
right,
and the decisions that you made to be here. And I remember that night my wife went out. She's not very confident on the scooter, and cut a long story short, she was riding back through a gang near where we were staying, but I didn't know exactly where, and some dogs were barking at her, and
Always the dogs.
she thought they were going to bite her, and they may or may not have been about to bite her. And again, the trigger happy accelerator, she accidentally, like, because she was scared, she sort of hit it, but hit it too hard and bounced off a wall, and then fell onto her shoulder and snapped her collarbone, like to the point where it the bone wasn't poking out of the skin, but almost.
Yeah.
Like, it was properly deformed. And then I remember I get a phone call. It was like one of the worst nights, actually. I get a phone call from her just going, help me. And I hear all these dogs in the background barking, I'm hurt. And I'm at home with the two kids, and I'm like, what do I do? Like, and I didn't know anyone. I'd only been in Bali like 2 weeks. I'm like, what do I do? And I didn't really know anyone. So I had to make this decision to lock the kids in the house.
Yeah.
And then go and find her in the streets because she didn't know where she was. So I'm riding around just hoping that I'll find her. And in the end, I actually found her because I actually followed the barking dogs.
Right.
And there she is on the ground. I didn't know what had happened to her. And then, so yeah, I worked it out pretty quick. And then we had to make some split-second decisions about the kids, and got to get her to hospital. And, in hindsight, I just was, I don't know, like, yeah, it really took a lot. It can be quite traumatic.
Yeah.
And I think it wasn't until months later that it might have been a form of PTSD.
100%.
And do you feel that do you think there'll be a little bit of post-trauma after
100%.
that? Because you've
I've
had
already started having weird dreams.
Have you?
But I kind of, living abroad, I knew that I would have kind of different reactions to different things, as we all do. You're living away from your comfort zone. You're living away from your support system that you were born into. But I've had family live abroad most of their lives as well. And so I've heard their stories, and I've heard the way that they've dealt with different situations, that I kind of, when this happened, I immediately started having more regular sessions with my therapist and just kind of talking to her about where I'm at, and then also letting her know, like, I don't know what it's going to look like for me and how I'm going to deal with this trauma, and I need your help.
Yeah.
And just kind of being really honest about where I'm at when I'm at it with everyone around me. And that's been really great. And really kind of a tool I've been trying to get more aligned with anyways in my life. And I think this accident, timing wise, has really helped me practice that.
And that's what you've learned.
Yeah, 100%.
Is there anything, because that was something I was thinking, like, you've learned the kindness and compassion of others in these situations, and you've learned what you just said about that experience. Any other learning experience?
100%. Oh yeah, I've definitely learned to release. I think that growing up as an eldest child, and as a child out of a product of divorce, I've learned the skills of over-functioning and like early parenting, like being in charge of my younger siblings and kind of becoming an overachiever has been something that I've tied my worth to over the last however many years.
Why?
Just from, wanting to make sure that my mom doesn't struggle, or like making sure that my sisters don't have to struggle, and kind of tying my worth to being a helper and a people pleaser. And
I think it's fear-based.
Perhaps, yeah. And
scared because it's like, well, I've got to make sure I'm controlling this situation so everyone's okay.
I think it's also going from a scarcity mindset as well. And like over the last few years living abroad, I've really learned to move more towards an abundance mindset, and to not be a people pleaser, not be, a self-sacrificer, not allow my need for validation to move me to be a hustler for validation. And so those are the things that I've really been working on releasing with my therapist before this accident. And in this time of healing, I've really allowed myself to really sit with those things and see how they've played out in different decisions I've made and different things that I do, and the way I interact with people, and the way that I set boundaries, and the way I react to people not respecting my boundaries, and just kind of really realizing that this has been an opportunity to reintegrate myself back into how I interact with the world around me.
Has it slowed you down, this accident?
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Do you think maybe maybe it needed to happen.
Oh, 100%. I definitely feel like everything happens for a reason. And like we were talking before about the Mercury in retrograde and the full moons and all of those things.
Have you got knowledge there?
I do a little bit.
Can you explain to me and everyone, what does it mean? Like, even just that sentence, the Mercury's in retrograde, like, I just think that it sounds so funny. Like, it sounds so like hippie. Like,
it does. It
like
does.
hippie bullshit. But can you maybe? I'm open-minded. I'm not criticizing it. Can you explain it to me? Like,
okay, so you're a surfer, right?
Yes.
And so you understand tides.
I try to.
Okay,
yep.
So depending on what's happening with the moon, the tides are different.
Yes.
They pull in more and they pull out more.
Yep, especially on a full moon.
Exactly.
So they're higher and lower. They're more extreme.
Okay, so people all have water in their bodies. I don't know the exact science. What is it, like 75? Yeah, 70%.
Apparently.
So just like the ocean, we are also affected by that pull.
Of course. I've never thought of that. Of course.
And so each planet and each kind of thing that's going on in the universe affects us in different ways. And Mercury affects communication.
The planet Mercury.
The planet Mercury.
Which is the closest planet to the sun.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we're the third planet from the sun.
Mm-hmm.
There's a planet between us.
Is that Venus?
I think so.
Yeah.
I'll have to go back to my grade 6 astronomy. But so, yeah, that's where I'm confused. Okay, so why does Mercury have such an influence? Is it because it's closest to the sun?
It's not that it has such an influence. All of them have influence. It's just one that comes up a lot because when it goes into retrograde, it actually just means that it stops moving forward. So it looks like from the eye that it's moving backwards. So it's called when Mercury goes into retrograde, and it does it about 4 times a year.
Does that mean then, is that having the influence on the moon cycle?
I think so. I don't know the reason why right now people are talking about both is because there was a really big full moon, and then also Mercury was in retrograde at the same time.
Yeah, because that's what I was thinking. Like maybe because the moon, like, you know, it sort of spins around the Earth. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does. Yeah, and we don't spin around it. No, it spins around us.
It spins around us. We spin around the sun.
We spin, and we just spin.
Yeah.
But then, like, and so I was thinking, like, and then, like, the moon, it moves closer and further from the Earth as it's spinning. Like, it's not exactly the same distance away. So then, when there's like these really big full moon periods, I guess that gravitational pull is going to be stronger.
Yeah.
And now I reflect upon it, you hear it all the time, like public hospitals on a full moon have, you know, and the data's there, like the statistics are there. They have more emergencies and then people always say, oh, full moon, everyone's crazy. And then even like when I remember when I used to party, I don't party anymore. Maybe I should start again, but
I support it.
Yeah. And so, yeah. And then like those nights I'd go out in a full moon, like it'd either be like a really crazy night or it would be, or like it'd be a dangerous night. There'd be like violence in the streets and stuff like that. So yeah, I do. I mean, I'm open to it.
And I guess you have to think about it as there's all these different planets that all have different things that they kind of function, and they're all affecting us at different times. So when you're born, the planets are all at one particular spot at your time of birth, different from everybody else. So it's almost like you have your own planetary blueprint or like fingerprint.
Yeah, right.
And so that affects you as well. So there's something that I've learned about since I've been abroad.
So what, when they're the same as when you were born on your birthday?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you're probably never going to see them exactly the same again. Wow. Because Saturn, it takes 27 to 29 years for it to return to the exact same spot. So there's something called your Saturn return, which I learned about. And a lot of people between the ages of 27 and 30 have really intense transformational periods of their life because Saturn's coming back and it's almost allowing them to question all of the beliefs that they've been given to as a human. They start to come up with their own ways of being and interacting with the world. So that's when you see a lot of people get divorced or realize or come out that they're gay or maybe move and make really big transitions into their career around that time. And that's when you look at the planets, that's what's happening. And yeah, you can track that. Like some people go through that Saturn return for 2 weeks. Some people go through it for 2 years.
Oh, man. Do you have any knowledge on the 7-year cycle?
Not as much, but I've been doing a lot of research on it with my writing, because a lot of writers also follow the 7-year cycle. So I know a little bit about it, but I'm definitely not as knowledgeable as like astrology.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, me either. I have heard some people talking about it, and yeah, I read a statistic or a piece of information once about every 7 years, well, it takes your body physiologically 7 years to regenerate every single cell in your body. So every 7 years, you literally have completely new cells in your body than you did 7 years before.
Right.
So effectively, you're a different person on a cellular level. So, and then apparently that's when like they talk about the 7-year itch, and then they also say musicians say that every 7 years the next big thing comes out. Yeah, things like that. So I don't know.
I mean, I think that if we look at the universe, if we look at just the earth and the way that it functions, everything's in cycles. The way that animals interact and migrate, the way that the seasons change, the way that, I mean, if you look at even with Bali, the way that, you know, the rice seasons change, everything has a season. And so it's just paying attention to what those seasons are for yourself, I think is also really important.
Yeah. So like, yeah, like, I mean, I don't want to talk about your accident anymore, but like okay. I guess like
it's a big part of what's going on now.
Well, yeah, like prior to it, I mean, you and I would probably chat regularly, and then it was just quite shocking that sort of happened. And now for me, because I haven't really seen you since the accident, because you've been recovering. Yeah, I'll be honest with you, like I'm seeing a very different Esther to like a month ago. Okay, like I'm seeing an Esther that seems very relaxed and kind of like. Not to say you weren't content, but you just seem like this, you have this really, I guess, like aura of peace and tranquility about you. So I'm like you, I don't really believe in coincidence anymore. And I think sometimes like when we suffer from that, the greatest things happen or the most profound life-changing moments occur through and post suffering, and then it's not till afterwards and maybe even sometimes years later that you go, wow, I really needed that to happen. Yeah. But at the time when you're in it, you're like, this is the worst, this couldn't be any worse. Yeah. But when you change that mindset, I don't know, it does help you become more resilient. 100%. Would you agree?
100%. And even looking at myself 10 years ago, there was a change for me that at the time felt really massive and like a really terrible experience. But now when I look back, I'm like, that helped me to get where I am now. And that's when my biological father actually passed away. And that was when I was in undergrad, and I was kind of at the peak of my like undergrad experience. I was homecoming queen. I was the I was the coordinator of the orientation staff. I was the head RA, which is a resident advisor. I was, volunteering at multiple organizations. I was working multiple jobs. I was, I was doing
such a leader.
I was doing all these things, but I wasn't taking care of myself. And when he passed, it was my opportunity to really reflect, and I'd kept putting off when I would go meet him or when I would give myself time to develop a relationship with him. And it goes...
So prior to that, were all of your interactions via phone?
Yeah, and I only had two. The one that I talked to you about in high school.
Physically communed with him?
And I had my second one when I went to Canada the year before I graduated from college to visit some of my uncles and my cousins. My cousin Petra, who we grew up together in the sense where we were the first couple years of our life we spent together. And she found me on Facebook and reached out and was like, our family would love to bring you to Canada to meet us, to take care of you, to see you. And so I took that opportunity. I went. And it was amazing. And I learned a different story about my biological father that I didn't know growing up, which is when I started to kind of question why he left.
So when he passed, what were some of the feelings that came up? Did you have a sense of like maybe guilt or shame that you didn't connect with him more?
100%.
Even though it really wasn't your fault.
Yeah.
But
it was one of those moments where I realized, why was I doing all the things I was doing? What was the purpose? What was I looking for? And I think now, after years of therapy, knowing like hustling for validation was what I was looking for, and getting kind of those pats on the back from a figure that I didn't know, from the figure that I was avoiding. And so, that was a really hard time for me. And I went through a state of depression, and I was, I started smoking weed, and I started drinking way too much, and I was having verbal and physical altercations with people because I had all this anger at both myself and kind of like the universe.
And it was manifesting.
Yeah.
While you were drunk? Or even when you weren't drunk?
Yeah, but I think anger was the one that was difficult for me to manifest in sobriety because I was afraid of my of anger. So then it would only come out later because I was repressing it. Mm-hmm.
You've on 2 occasions now, you've been very open about therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually love to hear that because, I mean, I can only speak for the Australian culture,
mm-hmm.
and it's there's a stigma associated with it.
Yeah.
If you're struggling and you're getting therapy, well, like, you don't talk about it and no one's to know. It's all very taboo, and
mm-hmm.
it's like, oh, they got a problem. And I mean, especially with dudes, like
100%.
Dudes, you in Australian culture, and I don't know if it's a cultural difference with the United States.
I think in different parts. I think in different regions, in different, in different, I guess, salary brackets. If you can afford therapy, then are you just manifesting these problems is something that has come up in my own social circles when I was growing up. Like, you can't afford to be mentally ill if you're in certain areas. And so it was never looked at as a thing that was, it's just rich white ladies is what, a lot of people have this.
It's a rich person's luxury.
It's a rich person's luxury. Yeah.
How has it benefited you?
It's benefited me in so many ways. I think I started, as I said, when I sent you my bio, it started for me mostly through my writing. I started my own kind of sense of self-therapy. And then actually reaching out and talking to somebody about it gives you a non-biased way of looking at yourself and a non-judgmental way, and somebody to teach you how to kind of be kinder to yourself. A lot of times we are our own worst critics. So we're looking at ourselves with way more judgment than anybody else, and a therapist can really help you see that.
Does it help prevent your emotions clouding the clear thinking? So does it just help, because often when we delve into our feelings,
mm-hmm.
okay, we become emotional,
mm-hmm.
and then that emotion can often prevent logical thinking.
I think it helps to create space to give it just creates space where you can observe that emotion and not identify with that emotion being who you are, because we're going to go through all those different emotions, and that's perfectly fine. I think it's when we feel like one emotion is who we are, and it gives you space to kind of really just allow yourself to feel it so it doesn't come back out later, but it also allows you to know that that's not what you're going to be feeling all the time. And
with your writing, so you're a creative writer,
mm-hmm.
okay, and would we say non-fiction?
I write all things. So I write non-fiction, I write fiction, I write magical realism, I write historical fiction, I write poems and short stories, and yeah.
And when did you start that journey?
When I was young, I
How
definitely
old?
started. I could not even tell you the age, maybe 6 or 7. I started keeping a journal. And then I really always loved creative writing classes. When my first memory of a story that I wrote that was creative was in grade 10. My world literature teacher had us we read Inferno, and we had to write our own 7 layers of hell, of our own versions of what it would look like. And I just loved that activity. I thought it was so much fun. And I always kept that, and I thought it was really cool. And then eventually I kept doing that, but I got away from it as I was doing all the things, getting into all my leadership positions and just kind of volunteering all the time, and writing kind of fell away. But I started writing again when I was in South Africa.
And that was approximately 10 years ago or less?
No, less. In 2014 is when I went to South Africa. I started blogging a little bit before to start talking about the preparations for the journey.
And documenting.
And so I was writing in that sense. And then when I was actually in South Africa, I was writing almost daily with my housemates and on my blog. And my housemates, we did this 3-day writing challenge. And that is where the first premise of my book came about. And so that was fun.
Premise of the book. I almost don't want to go there right now.
We don't have to. That's fine.
Because I'm curious, do you think writing has provided you with a tool or an outlet for dealing with inner turmoil?
100%. When I look back at my writing, so I have all of my journals since I've been abroad, and I have about 14.
Yeah.
And when I read through all of the different morning pages or the different writing prompts or activities, I can see different versions of myself coming through in different styles of writing. Mm-hmm.
Wow. And like going back again to the blogging, blogging's kind of like old school now, because it's turned into vlogging,
right?
And I almost think Instagram has become a form of blogging,
100%.
Really. So, and I do think it's a great way for writers or anyone that has I'm not a writer at all, but I think if I was going to be, I think those mediums are a great way to start, really, because documenting your life and what's going on, it's something I wish I actually was more proactive in earlier on in life, because as I get older, and with some of the things that I did document, or even old photos as a kid, and for me, I was really into skateboarding as a kid and a teenager, and like in hindsight, I wish my friends and I took more photos of each other skateboarding, and I wish even if I journaled about it and some of the experiences and the things we did and the mischief we got up to, it'd be so valuable. But you do forget.
Oh yeah.
And it becomes more valuable every day that goes along.
Have you ever heard of morning pages before?
No.
So Julia Cameron has written a book called The Artist's Way, and I started listening to it when I was living in Thailand. The first couple months that I lived there, I was afraid to drive a motorbike, and so I walked to school, and it took me about 20 minutes to get there, and I would listen to podcasts and different things on YouTube, and eventually my friend sent me her audiobook, and I started to listen to it. And she has all these different tools to help you unlock your creativity, and one of them is morning pages. And so it's you wake up in the morning, and it's the first thing you do. Maybe if you have to pee, you can go do that or get a glass of water. But you try not to lose that kind of first morning grogginess, and you just write for 3 handwritten pages, unedited, uncensored. And then you don't look at it for 2 weeks.
Why? Why that first morning, that morning brain? Why?
I think that morning brain is when you first start to let those little inner critic voices start to talk to you about the day, and start to think about what you could have done differently in your most recent experiences. You're still connected a little bit to your dream time, so some creativity comes out as well. It's just allowing your voice to be heard by yourself in a way that you don't censor. And a lot of times when we write, even if we're journaling, sometimes there's fear that someone's going to read it and they're going to judge us, or it needs to be perfect. And this allows you to just literally write where you're at. Even if you're writing, I have nothing to write this morning, you eventually come up with something as you're writing those 3 pages. And handwritten, you're really connecting with yourself in a way that we can't when we're doing it digitally.
Yeah. It's funny, and I see that with students as well. I am adamant that they do not learn as thoroughly when they have to type and do things as digitally. It was meant to make learning more convenient, but I don't think it has. But that's a whole nother topic. Going back to the morning brain, I know for me, I learnt about 7 years ago, maybe longer, that my morning brain is terrible. My whole family knows it. My wife knows it. I'm hopeless in the mornings. I'm grumpy. I'm unapproachable, and I'm hopeless. I can't organize anything. I can barely get my day together with my lunch and my bag and whatever. I'm actually really no good till about 9 a.m. But it wasn't until I actually acknowledged that, hey, I'm terrible in the mornings. Now I've developed morning routines. Yeah. And it has been so integral in changing my life. Yeah. And now with little kids who insist on waking up at 5:30 every day, it got hard. And then I stopped doing my morning routine because the kids would always be up before me. And then I'm starting the day, and then I'm grumpy at breakfast. And I'm snapping at people, and I'm hurting feelings and of my loved ones in little ways, and just not being nice. Now, I make an effort. I get out of bed at 4:30 a.m.
You have to,
but it's the best thing. And sometimes I meditate or I do yoga. I always try to stretch, or I do some rolling on my foam roller, and maybe even listen to a podcast. Maybe do an Instagram post for the podcast, things like that. And you saying that has just reinforced to me how important it is.
Yeah.
And I guess if you're a creative such as yourself, it's very tactical.
So I will actually challenge what you just said. It doesn't have anything to do with being a quote unquote creative. And in the Artist Way, she talks about this. She does trainings for business people. She does trainings for, everybody is a creative. In ways, we're all creative. We're all storytelling. Anytime you tell a friend about an experience you've had, you're doing a story. You're creating the way that you want people to hear that story. So we're always creating. As teachers and educators, we are creating lessons to engage our students where they're at, which means we're being creative. So no one is not a creative. And so this tool is actually important for everyone because it helps you to unlock that creativity, and it helps you to get rid of that inner critic. Because even you saying, oh, I was a terrible morning person, that's a narrative you're telling yourself that your inner critic helped to spur. And so these different activities help you to decrease the loudness of that inner critic and help you to unlock that creativity in every aspect of your life.
It makes so much sense. Yeah, and you kind of called me out there. I do have a very strong inner critic. I think we all do.
We all do. Mm-hmm.
And I think it comes down to this protective mechanism, because if we put ourselves down, then we don't really need to be the best version of ourselves, and it's okay to be mediocre. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, yeah, I'm not that good, so I don't have to really try at anything, do I? Mm-hmm. And then you can really stay stagnant and wake up 20, 30 years later and wish your life away.
Mm-hmm. And it's also a protective way to interact with others, because it's, again, going back to what we think other people are thinking of us. And if we put out there our worst fears first, then it doesn't matter what they say, right?
And they can't hurt you.
They can't hurt us.
They can't hurt me.
And one of the really awesome authors I've been listening to recently, or she's an educator on shame and vulnerability, is Brene Brown. And she just talks about leading from vulnerability. And a lot of times we lead with a shield and protect ourselves. And we put those speed bumps in front of us. And then we start creating this narrative that we think other people might say or might do. And then it's really, we're putting that in our path, and we're blocking ourselves from things.
Since I've started the podcast, there's been... I think you'll be episode 29 or 30. I've got a couple that I haven't released yet, and I don't know what order I'm going to do them. But anyway, let's not talk about that. But
I wouldn't mind being 32 or 33.
Well, hey, you're into numbers. If there's a specific number
into numbers right now.
But where was I going with this? Yeah, I've lost my train of thought.
Since you've been doing the podcast?
Yeah, there's been common themes that keep arising. And one of them is the importance of getting out of your comfort zone. Mm-hmm. And another one that keeps popping up is the power of shame. Mm-hmm. And I don't think I truly understood what shame was until sort of recently.
Yeah.
And it's that inner narrative. It's that voice that says you're hopeless, you're not good enough. Mm-hmm. And I didn't realize how much hurt was coming out of my shame and how much it allows others to affect you, because we live in an imperfect world full of imperfect people, and people are going to affect you negatively at times, and it's so easy to go, and if you make a mistake, especially for me, if I make a mistake, my mind just goes to, you're a loser. God, you're dumb. You're not good enough. Straight away. It's like my default setting. Mm-hmm. But now that I'm aware of it, I'm actually not going into shame as much.
Yeah.
And I feel my confidence is coming back, and dare I say, self-appreciation.
Yeah. I mean, self-compassion and self-kindness are actually the two biggest tools that we can give ourselves. And I think that having those morning routines are actually building ways to appreciate yourself more. You're actually giving yourself time to take care of yourself. We think about how we can take care of others all the time, but we often neglect ourselves the most.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And you set yourself up for success.
Because then you have compassion for other people who might be operating in a space where they don't have as much to give in that moment, and you can have more compassion for them in that space and not take things personally. And I think that's something that happens to us a lot as well, as we take what other people are going through, their projections and the way that they're interacting with us, we take it personally. And instead of thinking about the fact that their inner critic is doing the same thing our inner critic is doing.
Yeah.
And if we just give them that space, we hold that space for them. And if we're in a good space where it's not affecting us, we're kind of like in the calm, the eye of the storm, it's not gonna impact us as much. And it's also then gonna not impact that person and help that person recognize their own boundary issues that they're having.
Oh, that's awesome, Esther. That's really profound.
I've got all sorts of insights these days.
It's true. Yeah, and because I think us humans are so self-centered. We might talk to someone and they in their mind might be just having a terrible time with themselves, but straight away, and they might be a little bit unfriendly, but straight away we go, oh God, they just snubbed me. They're ignoring me. It's all about me, and not once do we think. Well, rarely do we go, oh, maybe they're just having a really tough time.
Yeah.
And, it's really, really interesting.
I think about that for the perfectionism thing that you were talking about earlier, is like a lot of times we don't realize our perfectionism is actually hurting others because we hold ourselves to a specific standard and we judge ourselves, but rarely do we judge other people at our own standards. But other people don't see that or know that. But because we're holding ourselves to such high standards, they assume that we're now judging them on the standards that we're judging ourselves on. And then it makes it hard to approach us because we aren't giving ourselves space or compassion. So then people don't know that we'll give them that same compassion or space either.
That's good. And I mean, it's hard for me to say out loud on record, but it's something I really need to work at. It's a struggle.
I think as educators especially, we are setting the tone for our students, and perfectionism is a really hard one, especially with the way society is right now. It makes it difficult for us.
Yeah, and we do live in a competitive world where we have to feel compelled to strive for things, and then also protect ourselves financially. We need to try and
protect our ideas. Even patenting an idea is something that's so counterintuitive to us as humans, I think, because we can't survive as individuals. It's just not possible. But we've set ourselves up in this materialistic, competitive nature that we have to compete against each other. And that is actually making it harder for us to survive in this world in a more, I think, compassionate way.
Have you ever felt the need to patent ideas?
No, I just think about when people come up with ideas, it's the first thing that comes up to they're like, well, what if somebody takes this idea? And it's like, there's something my grandfather always says is there's no new ideas under the sun. And it's so true. And I don't think that we need to worry so much about that. I think that if we're living in our most authentic selves and we're being true to ourselves and we're doing the things that make us passionate and we are showing up, that the universe is going to take care of us, and we don't need to worry about how we're going to fund it or how we're going to, make a living. I think that part comes into, if we're giving back to the world is going to give back to us.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny. Like, it's just the last year, actually, that I've been really worried about people stealing my ideas. or sometimes, like, I'll suspect, like, I'll see someone doing something, and I'll be like, that was my idea, wasn't it? But then I'm not sure if they already had the idea, and I'm like, I feel like they stole my idea. But then they probably didn't. But it's in my head, and it's this insecurity of, like, again, it's all about me. And, I want to beat you and I want to be superior, and it's this inflated sense of ego that I think drives that.
Yeah, well, even like what you were saying about even just starting this podcast is that everybody's story is unique. So your idea, even though there's no new ideas under the sun, everybody's ideas are still unique to their situation. I mean, you go on the cereal aisle and there's how many types of cereal and they're all doing fine, so we don't need to be competitive in that sense, if that makes the right thing will
that's
be.
Really nice healing to hear. There's a reason, and I'll tell you off
okay.
off mic.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like I said, I like the cereal analogy.
Mm-hmm.
I can't believe you said that. We'll talk later.
Okay.
So listen.
Sounds good.
Now,
okay.
Let's go back a little bit.
Yeah.
So
we've talked about a lot.
You grew up in Florida.
No, I actually grew up in North Carolina.
So can you describe? Okay, and so a small town.
Small-ish. I grew up in Durham, North Carolina. So I don't know if you've ever heard of the Duke Blue Devils. It's a
sports team.
Yeah, college sports basketball team, which is huge in the South.
So foreign.
And I grew up as a Carolina fan, so that's the UNC Tar Heels. So it was big rivalry. You know, everybody wears two different colored blues. You're either a Duke fan or you're a Carolina fan or you're a State fan, which was the red. And you know, like you grow up with this culture of like, if you are a Duke fan, you're a terrible person. And if you're a Carolina fan, you're a terrible person.
It's all college. It's all college ball.
College ball, yeah.
That's so foreign to an Australian. we don't have a college league like that at all. We have a national league in rugby league and soccer and Australian football. They're our main sports. And then in summer we have cricket. But we don't have, I swear we just don't have that level of passion and commitment. Ooh. I mean, I've heard the stories about with basketball and gridiron. Mm-hmm. Wow. And like you just said, like if you're a supporter of a certain team.
House is divided. I mean, you have T-shirts where it says House Divided, or you have like the license plate that says House Divided.
So would you not be friends with someone?
I mean,
because of that,
you might judge them a little bit on their opinions if you know they're a Duke fan.
You wouldn't date them.
I mean, I think as you get older, you realize like there's some things you just can't help. So funny story about that quickly. Lo and I, when we first started dating, we realized that he was a Gator fan, which is the University of Florida, and I went to Florida State. Well, this is just colleges in general. Okay. And I went to Florida State, and so we were a house divided. And so when he moved in with me in Thailand, I gave him a welcome home present, and I bought him a Florida Gator shirt, but I also bought him a Florida State shirt, and I wrapped the Florida Gator shirt in the Florida State shirt. So when he opened the present, it looked like I was giving him a Florida State shirt, and he just threw it at me. And I was like, and it fell on the floor and it opened and you could see the Gator shirt. And he's like, oh, okay. Like, fine. He was like, I'm washing it before I wear it.
Oh my God. That's hilarious. Mm-hmm. It's hard for me to understand, but it's so good to, it's so good to hear.
It's definitely, we've got like these rivalries for sure.
Yeah. It's great. It's passion. As long as it's like, it's a fun, healthy rivalry, as opposed to what happens with the soccer leagues in Europe where they try to burn each other's stadium down and stuff like that.
I don't think that happens. It's definitely more fun. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So you grew up in North Carolina,
which is considered the South. It's Durham.
So like the southern states of America.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So from my very limited knowledge of the southern states of America is that it's maybe like more rural.
Yeah.
And more, I guess, country vibes.
Yeah.
A lot of small towns. We were in a place where it was kind of more like suburby. So not a big city, but not considered the country. So would there be a lot of small-minded thinking?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
100%.
And you don't seem like a small-minded thinker at all. In fact, you're one of the most sort of growth mindset people I've ever met. But how did you find growing up in those sort of areas as a child?
I think it was interesting on multiple levels. I think one, because I'm biracial, that added an interesting extra layer.
So your mother's Caucasian?
Yeah.
Okay.
And my biological father was African, but my stepdad was African American. So when we moved to North Carolina, we were one of the only biracial families that I knew of at our school. And it was our school was integrated, obviously, but you could feel it was still segregated. Did you feel like a minority? 100%. I felt like a minority within a minority.
Within the black community, you felt like a minority?
I felt like I had to choose a side, and by not choosing a side, I created my own minority. But
of course you did that. That's so you.
It was interesting. I think now being biracial or being from multiple cultures is not as abnormal. But when I was growing up, in North Carolina in elementary school, it was weird. Like, it was, if you weren't white and if you weren't black, it was almost kind of like, are there any other minorities? And obviously we had students from other, racial groups, but it was just kind of like, where do you fit in?
Yeah.
And so I found that really interesting, and the conversations I would have with friends around my identity was really interesting, because I wasn't sure how to identify as I was growing up, because I didn't really think about it until I got to public school.
So how are you acquiring friends then as a young person? Was it based on just how you gelled, or were you actually basing it? Was it judgment based?
I think it was a lot of different things. I think I still do this to this day, is I try to make friends with everyone to kind of figure it out.
Yeah.
To figure out what works best for me, which I think is also a weird trait that not everybody does. And so there was definitely a little bit of like, oh, well, you're friends with this group, so that doesn't mean you can be friends with this group. And I would be like, oh, but I'm going to be friends with everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So there was really that divide in America between black and white, or Hispanic, because in Australia, I'll try and relate an experience. In Australia, there, especially, I see it in the public school systems too, there is a divide there. With the diversity of cultures that exist, and Australia has become a lot more multicultural, but it's still very, I guess, Caucasian, or Anglo-Saxon.
Yeah.
In a majority of areas, we have our diverse areas in the outskirts of the larger cities.
Yeah.
But I see it in the playground still divided, you know, and even myself growing up, even though I was born in Australia, my mother's family are from the white settlers, which I'm not really proud to say. And then my father, he was born in Malta, which is off the coast of Italy in the Mediterranean. So I got these traits of darker skin, darker hair, darker features. And so I was automatically put into the category of being like ethnic, and also because of my surname. However, all born there. My father had lived in the country since he was one, like a baby, but still I was put into the migrant category. Even though both my grandfathers fought for Australia in World War II for the British Empire, because Malta's part of the British Empire, I was still put into that category. Here's my question.
Yeah.
Why do us humans categorize? What do you think?
I think it's a survival tactic.
Yeah.
If we categorize and then one group does better than another group, then we can say that we're victorious. And I think that goes back to kind of what, capitalism has capitalized on, honestly, is with these different categories, then we can market to different categories, and we can make a profit off of that.
Wow. You think it comes down to profits?
Yeah, even in tribal communities, it's not profit in the same way as like monetary, like green money or, multicolored money as we have in Bali. But I think it has to do with resources and communication and being able to identify with the other. And I think that it's a lot easier to vilify others than it is to actually just communicate with them and to find a way to share resources and access to the things that we have here on Earth.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like it's easy is the key word there. Do you think you've experienced levels of discrimination or prejudice, or even, dare I say, racism?
Yeah, in lots of different ways. And
what does it look like explicitly?
I would say one of the first ways that I guess I experienced it was really interesting, as I was asked by a teacher when I was in grade 5 why I was indoors during recess playing backgammon. And she told me that I needed to be outside with the other black kids. And so in so many ways, it was really kind of dehumanizing and humiliating for both myself and for my, people of color, and for, it was saying that, I had to be outside and be athletic to kind of own my blackness versus, I don't know, it was just really interesting. And it was like, the way that it came out was really, it was
the
hard.
First time you actually went, whoa.
I think another time I was younger. I don't remember what grade I was in, but it was bring your parent to school day or bring your parent to lunch day. And at that time, I think I was still understanding, blended families as well. And I brought my mom, and everybody knew that my mom had remarried. And so they were like, oh, that must be your stepmom. And I was like, no, that's my mom. And then when my dad came, who is African American, but he was my stepdad, I was like, this is my stepdad. And they're like, no, that's your dad. And this is your stepmom. And I was like, what? So I think it was trying to understand colorism. It was trying to understand blended families. It was trying to understand why I was needing to be put in these different categories. I think I'd been called an Oreo before because I was in
black and white,
the smart classes. So I had a white inside and a black out exterior. I think living abroad, hair has been a big thing. I mean, it's a big thing in
because
America.
Of your dreadlocks?
Just black hair in general, I think, is something that's interesting. There are some policies in America in certain places where if you have your hair a certain style, then you could get fired. And so it becomes a big thing about appropriation when people that are not of color wear their hairstyles in ways that people of color wear them and get vilified for them. And so, having dreadlocks was really an amazing journey for me, but people were constantly putting their hands in my hair without asking, and people were constantly asking me, is this your real hair? Can I cut it off and have it? And there's just lots of little things that you're like, you don't expect people to approach you in that way. I don't know, it's hard. It's a hard one to know. There's like microaggressions, I guess I would say, that people don't know what they're doing, and they don't know that it's being racist, if that makes sense.
But you don't feel like it's been to the point where it's disabled your personal progress?
No, I feel that I've been really fortunate in my life and in the people who I've had advocating for me, that I've had an opportunity to do the things that I wanted to do and not be hindered in that way. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that hasn't damaged your self-confidence at all? No,
I think honestly it's actually boosted my confidence, because a lot of times in the African American community, if you're doing something, you feel like you're already putting your all anyways, but then, it almost feels like you have extra hurdles that you have to like jump over. So when you do accomplish something, you feel like, yeah, man, I did that. Like, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's so cool. It's very, I guess, for me to hear some of those things. I'm actually sitting here identifying with you because my mother, for example, is like looks very opposite to me. She's got very fair skin. Mm-hmm. She had light hair, blue eyes. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the times throughout my life, like, people would meet my mother and go, oh, she's not your mother. Yeah. She can't be your mother. I'm like, well, she's my mother. Like, yeah. But nothing like her, I thought she would have been darker. Like, just like, I know a lot of it's ignorance or just thoughtlessness.
100%.
And I guess it builds resilience too. Mm-hmm. And do you have strategies for resilience? Or is it just, do you like, or is that a silly question, or is it just something that just occurs, like you just...
Well, before I answer that, I'll go to what I was thinking about as you were talking about the thoughtlessness and ignorance. I think living abroad as well, things that would frustrate me in America, like if somebody put their hand in my hair without asking, or as being abroad, it's giving me an opportunity to educate people about, this is the reason why you don't do that. This is the reason why you ask before you do something like that. Or being able to educate about my hair, or being able to educate about African American history, or being able to educate even about South African American history or South African history. And so I find that the things that used to bring me frustration now give me an opportunity to educate.
Interesting. So, like, you turn them into opportunities.
Yeah.
Learning opportunities.
And I think that is kind of going into your next question about are there tools for resilience? And I think that it is looking at each moment in life as an opportunity for either yourself to learn or for you to, again, I guess, radiate those breadcrumbs and help other people learn.
I love, okay, I'm so glad you said it. Radiate the breadcrumbs. When I read that, I was like, that's interesting. Like, when you say radiate those breadcrumbs, like, break that down for us. Like, you're giving people little bits of food for thought. Is that
yeah, I guess it's like
notion?
little nuggets of wisdom. And
nuggets of wisdom. Yeah.
I think it's because of all the different writing groups that I've been a part of, and they've never looked the same, but people always leave with tools. And it's the same as being an educator, you know, like you don't impact one student's life the same way as any other student. So it's like, you don't actually know what you're giving them. So I say radiate because it's kind of, you're more of a tool being used to give somebody something that they may have experienced or gotten themselves anyways. It's kind of like we're gardeners, you know, like we're all doing our different part. Some of us are actually putting the seeds in, some of us are actually toiling the soil, some of us are actually watering, and it's like we don't know sometimes what impact we're going to have on somebody else. We don't know what other nuggets of wisdom that they've gotten, so we don't know how we're radiating, how it's going to affect those nuggets they already have.
Yeah, and like it may just be like one little piece of the jigsaw puzzle that they needed to hear, and it could be one little element or even one little word you use or thing you said that just gives them that light bulb moment and goes, oh, that's it. That puts all the other things that I've been working towards together.
But that one person couldn't have done it by themselves, like unless all those other people were there. And that's why I'm not doing anything besides I'm radiating whatever it is you were meant to get, and I don't have control over that.
And see, this is why I think sharing stories is the best way to go about it. Like, share your story. Like, and I think learning and healing comes from hearing other people's stories. Like, that has been my motivator, especially in this podcast journey of just getting people to get their stories out there. And what I'm noticing as I go along is people are contacting me, sending me private messages saying, I really like this aspect of what you and so were talking about. And I didn't even give it two thoughts. It just was like, for me, it was a mundane detail. It didn't resonate. I didn't even consider it. But for that person, it was like, wow, that was really cool. And I was like, oh, wow. I'm like, that's really interesting that people find that he or she found that intriguing. I'm like, I thought it was just boring. You know, so nice. I love that. I really love that. Now, so high school years, challenging, good, enjoyable.
I mean, I was a track athlete.
You're into that stuff.
I loved it. It was really fun. I was in choir. I had terrible singing voice, but I just loved harmonizing. I was into languages. I was really into reading, which I still am today. And like what you were saying about people getting different things from the podcasts. And I find that about books as well, as I feel like, you know, some people say like rereading a book is really mundane or boring, but I find every time I read it, I come to it with a new perspective. So I'm taking different things that I didn't even notice the first time I read it. And so that stuck with me. High school, I would say was great. I loved it. And
like, is that where like your writing journey started? Now, I know we talked about that earlier. You said you started writing. Yeah,
I was much younger, and I would say I probably didn't write a lot in high school, except for school related, because I was doing so much.
Okay, and you said there was a teacher that really stuck out for you.
Yeah, Miss Davidson.
Was that high school?
I was in high school. Yeah.
Okay, what was it about her that stood out?
I mean, she just approached learning with enthusiasm and talked about topics that I would never think to find interesting, like history. She talked about them in such a way that made you understand that we are living in history right now.
Okay.
Everything is history.
Okay.
And she, you know, came up with little mnemonic devices or little tools to help us remember things that we normally wouldn't remember. And she helped me learn how to love note-taking, and like she helped me learn. I loved studying for her classes. Like she just was. She related to you on your level.
Okay.
And she was just awesome. She was a badass.
I think she took like personal interest in you. Like she was, actually no, the question is, do you feel like she was giving you genuine time?
I feel like she gave all of her students genuine time. Okay. And I feel like that was what was magical about her, because she had the same amount of students in her class that every other teacher had. And she found a way to interact with and engage with each student, where you didn't feel like you were just a seat in a chair.
Is that what you try to do in your teaching practices?
100%. Yeah.
I can tell.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so important, those developing of relationships with your students that are authentic.
Mm-hmm.
And kids remember.
Yeah, I find rapport building is probably the first thing I try to do as an educator in any educational learning environment. And I've been able to teach in, kindergarten settings all the way up to adults. So I've taught in all the different age ranges. And I find that if you build a rapport, it doesn't matter what you're teaching, because the students trust you and the students trust that you have their best interest.
Exactly. And they're never going to learn if they're not engaged. So if you can't show them that you're interested in them and you have their attention, there's no use delivering any content, because they're not going to listen. They're not going to actually absorb it.
Yeah.
And I think rapport building, it's an art form, especially in our profession, where, we're faced with groups that are so diverse in various ways, with the different learning styles, cultural backgrounds, gender, sexual orientations. There's so much to consider. And that's why I truly believe that educators have one of the most important jobs in the world. And I'm biased, yes, but I really do believe it, because you have this almost opportunity to shape and mould future societies.
Oh, 100%. I mean, we interact
so
with
important.
Every single profession there is, because we interact with every single person who's going to go into all those different professions. So I do think educators are the most important people around, because they're helping to create strategies for communicating. And I feel like that's where things break down always. And if you can't learn how to communicate as a learner, then you will fail later on in life.
When a student leaves your class at the end of a year, so you've had them for a whole year and they're going to move on, what is it that you would like them to be leaving with the most? So is it a increased knowledge base of humanities, or ability to, or what is it that you hope that you've actually left them, that they'll be departing with from you?
I think being able to reflect on who they are and where they're at, and having tools to continue to do that, knowing that they're not going to ever be the same. Yeah.
Wow. You just nailed that. That's like a quote. It's incredible.
Nice.
I'm going to quote that somehow. I'm going to quote
I've never been quoted.
It's great. You're getting quoted. You've never been quoted?
Well, maybe I have. I don't know.
So you had this awesome teacher, and then you transitioned straight to university from high school?
Yeah, and I went into political science because I wanted to be a refugee lawyer. I always knew cool. I wanted to be abroad.
Humanitarian.
Yeah, I always knew. I definitely used to tell people, I was like, I wanted to work for the UN, and I wanted to have like an Angelina Jolie, Brad Pitt type family, and I wanted to do those things.
Like
and I was adopt and also have natural children, but from all the different countries, and we'd be speaking all the different languages, and we'd be eating all the different types of food, and I was all for it. And then when I got to undergrad, actually more of my energy went into the things I was doing in student affairs. And so like I started out as just in my residence hall. We didn't have, I can't remember what it was that we didn't have, but I started advocating for it. And they were like, well, why don't you run for residence hall president? And I was like, oh, what's that? And they're like, well, you can volunteer, and it just means that you get to have a voice for the students in the residence hall for different things. And I was like, okay, great. I ran, I won, and I got really involved. And then the next year, I actually decided to be a resident advisor, where you actually get paid, you get free housing. But again, you are making decisions for the residents. But at that time, it was called community advisor, which I think is a better term, but nobody knew what it was. So there wasn't actually a lot of recognition for people who left the school as community advisors to get jobs in student affairs, because they were like, well, what is community advisor? But everybody knew what a resident advisor was. So I advocated for us to have a residence advisor association, and the first thing we did was change the name. So that way we got more recognition, and advocated for, more pay, more benefits, different things like that. And I started to get really involved in student affairs, and I joined the orientation staff and helped orientation leaders in different ways, and I was able to actually interact with every single freshman that came into the school and help mentor them and do different things like that. So I started in this like advocacy work really early, but it made me change trajectories from refugee to students. And then politics is just something that was really frustrating for me. So I was like, actually being a lawyer is not something that I really think that I had the capacity for or the patience for, I guess. And so when I graduated, I decided to move up to DC and live with my grandparents for a little while and kind of explore different things. And 6 months in, I was like, yeah, politics is not for me. And I went back to grad school and I decided to pursue international education development.
Internet. And then that's really cool. So you effectively, through that postgraduate course, you became a teacher.
Through that. So I actually, the way I applied for that was it was a joint master's program. So you got into the Peace Corps as well as the master's program. Yep. So you were supposed to do a year of the master's program and then you go for 2 years to your Peace Corps. You come back for a year. I, maybe 6 to 7 months in, everybody in my cohort, there was about 10 of us, were starting to find out where our placements were and everyone's getting excited. And I get a letter from Peace Corps saying, hey, you know, for the medical checks, you have a lot of dental work that you need to get done. And as a Peace Corps volunteer, we don't have the resources and funds to send you without worrying about, you know, you might need work done. I was heartbroken. So I basically got put on medical leave and they were like, we can remove it if you get like basically 20 grand worth of medical work done or dental work done on my teeth, which I didn't have that kind of money. So I was heartbroken and just was seeing again like this obstacle of like something that I really wanted to do and watching all my friends go and out into the world and do and be able to like use these experiences and use the knowledge that they were gaining. So what I decided to do was I'd been taking you had to take some teacher training courses in our program, and I was taking TESOL courses, teaching English to speakers of other languages. So I decided to continue to pursue that and also get a certification in program evaluation and just to finish my graduate degree and not worry about Peace Corps. And one of my advisors was the one that suggested I apply for Fulbright. And with Fulbright, you can actually apply to a specific location and for a specific specialty.
So whereas, what is Fulbright exactly? It's a college or just a program?
It's a granting program
like
where
they send
program. And they send scholars to do research or to do education or to do both.
Ah, wow.
Yeah. And so I got into that.
And then from there, you ended up in Africa. Yeah.
And it was a long process. I actually, the first year after I graduated, I just was teaching English to speakers of other languages at Florida State. And they have like an intensive English program. And so I really enjoyed it and I was good at it. And I was like, well, maybe this is what I'm going to do. But then, you know, I was like, I do want to go abroad and I do want to go to South Africa. So I put in my application. I got it in 2013 is when I found out, and then I left in 2014.
Amazing. Mm-hmm. And so you've been on the road since then?
Yeah.
Wow. So what was it like teaching in Africa then?
It was really wonderful.
Challenging though?
It was challenging in the sense that, you know, I was teaching at a school that originally was for Afrikaans students, and then later on, after apartheid, became an integrated school. But a lot of the teachers who were hired were teaching in not their traditional language and teaching subjects that they weren't necessarily proficient at. And students were being sent to do different degrees than they actually wanted to sign up for because of numbers. So it was just really kind of a frustrating but also really amazing experience because, you know, as much as I wanted to get away from politics when I was choosing my career path, I realized politics isn't everything.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So then traveling Africa, and then once that started, then you've started to really delve back into your creative writing, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And from where I'm sitting and getting to know you over the last 12 months, it seems like you're more driven than ever. Mm-hmm. And you're writing a book.
I am.
Right. And has this been an underlying goal for a lot of your life and you've just finally decided to really take it on? Or?
Yeah, I think so. I think when I was younger, I definitely was like, oh, I could see myself being a writer.
Yeah.
And then it just never became like a tangible goal. It just became kind of like a hobby. And then in South Africa, when I wrote for 3 days, I wrote 26 pages and I was like, oh, whoa, I could actually do this. And then when Christine and I started the writers group in Thailand and we were writing each week and I was watching my notebooks just fill up, I was like, wow, actually this can be a thing.
You're like, I've got content.
I've got content. Yeah. So it's been since 2014, I've been working on the same book.
Have you given yourself a timeline?
I have multiple timelines. So my goal was by 2020, I wanted to publish my first book.
Great.
And it was going to be this book that I actually wrote in my bio called The Enchanted Elm. And it is the book that I started writing in South Africa. But honestly, over the last few months, I've been realizing that I have all this content that I've written in my time being abroad. I have short stories, I have essays, I have poems. And so I'm thinking that actually for my 33rd birthday, which is in May in 2020, that I will be publishing that collection of stories.
A collection of short stories.
Exactly. And it shows those different themes that I've discovered about myself since I've been living abroad. You can see when I was living in South Africa, the short stories and poems I was writing, kind of that healing process of meeting my
does it feel just a little
family.
bit more pertinent to where you are at in life at the moment? And
yeah.
Like, you just want to get it out there.
100%.
And it's part of the journey.
It's part of the journey. And I think that it is helping me in releasing my inner critic as well, because it's not meeting this like perfect criteria. It's just me, unedited, unfiltered, where I'm at, where I've been, how I've come to be who I am. So my goal is to take 33 of the stories that I've written over the last 5 years, put them into a book.
Is it autobiographical?
Yeah, a little bit.
The short stories?
No, some are fiction. So it's going to be
based on experiences.
Based on experiences, and some are essays of actual like experiences I've had in South Africa and experiences I've had in Thailand and Bali and Vietnam, and some are just pure fiction and I have no idea and they're weird and they don't make any sense, but they, I enjoy them, and so I want to put them out there.
Like, do you enjoy them because you actually like the dialogue that's happening in them and the way they just sound verbally in your head?
Yeah. And even when I share them out loud. So one of the things at all my writing groups is that I ask people to do two things, and one is share without fear and listen without judgment. So we're actually not allowed to give feedback to writers at the writers group, because a lot of times people are worried about what their voice is going to sound like, and until you hear your voice out loud, you actually don't know what it sounds like either. So it's really a powerful tool and practice to start doing.
Yeah, it would be.
Mm-hmm.
It is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I hate the sound of my own voice. But yeah, again, that's a confidence thing.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think, I guess it could change the whole tone and do you think it could, the way it's read and the tonation of it could actually change the meaning in some contexts?
Perhaps. I don't know. Like recently I've started listening to audiobooks a lot more. I love audiobooks. And I love listening to the ones where it's actually read by the author. I find it's really interesting for me. So I want to probably do an audiobook of my book once I finish it.
I cannot believe you're saying that, because I've just finished listening to an amazing audiobook by a guy called Michael Pollan. He wrote a book, How to Change Your Mind. It's a brilliant book. And I was so intrigued by him, I looked him up and I heard he did an awesome podcast on the Joe Rogan Experience. And then I listened to the podcast with him, and he's just got an epic voice. Like, he's not a trained vocalist or anything like that, but he's just got a really good voice. And he said that with this book, he read it himself.
Mm-hmm.
And he said it was one of the biggest bits of feedback he got was that prior books, he was employing actors to read his book, like trained professionals, semi-famous, so people go, oh, is that Sean Penn reading that?
Yeah.
And he said, but once he did it, all of his fans were like, thank you for reading it yourself, because it gives it authenticity.
Right.
It gives it more, I guess, power as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And because someone can read verbatim, but when you're reading your own work verbatim, you know the meaning literally behind every single thing, because you birthed every single one of those words.
Yeah.
And do you find when you write an article or a short story,
Mm-hmm.
like, is it like giving birth?
100%. And
Like,
actually so when I
from
was talking
conception
about
of the idea.
So when I was talking earlier about my idea about being like working for the UN and having all these kids, I always had a vision of myself being a mother. And as I've gotten older and the more I've been in education, the more I've traveled, the more I've realized I don't want to be a mother in that physical sense, but that I feel like I am a mother in the sense of creativity and in the sense of spiritual mentorship and in the sense of being an educator and a mother to all that come into my life that need me in those moments. And so through my writing, I do feel like I'm giving birth to different things and I'm able to actually impact people in different ways.
Yeah, with your perspective, I mean, and that's the thing, like you were saying earlier, I think, did you say your grandfather said there's no new ideas?
Mm-hmm.
But there is only one ever unique, like you will always have a unique perspective on an idea.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think people need to remember that, just because, you know, they can't let that limit them.
No,
because that's not my
100%.
idea. So, no, it doesn't mean you can't still, you know, work with that idea, just because your perspective of it will be so different. And going back to the other book you said you wrote, The Enchanted Elm,
Mm-hmm.
have you just put that on the back burner and something you might continue to toy with? Or?
I still write for it, and pieces are coming out in different ways. But I think that, to be honest, the way I was writing it was for an audience, for what I thought a specific audience wanted to hear. And I'm realizing more and more that story is going to take a different shape. And so I'm just allowing it to kind of take its time and manifest itself into whatever it needs to be.
And evolve into, okay.
So it's still there, and it's getting bigger, and it's definitely got some elements of sci-fi, some historical fiction, some magical realism, and lots of different elements that I love to read. But I definitely am realizing as I'm reading different authors as well that I was writing for what I thought people wanted to hear versus what I needed to write.
That's so good.
Mm-hmm.
Keep it real.
Yeah.
I do the same.
Mm-hmm.
I do things because I think that's what people want or they want to hear or do. But I've actually been really working on that lately. You know, yeah, it's just great that you said that. You know, I was sitting here, like, it's such a nice backdrop. Like, where you're sitting, I'm looking at you on the microphone, and then there's like numerous beautiful coconut trees, and there's this one coconut tree with really big coconuts that look like they're ready to fall off, and I'm just like, imagine just climbing up and getting one of those. And then my next thought was like, oh man, my top lip is so sweaty. Like, I've got it. So I've got a moustache at the moment for, you know, advocating for men's health for Movember. And I used to, in Australia, it's a really big tradition. I don't know if you've experienced the Movember phenomenon. Yeah. I think it's just a fun way to advocate for an issue, you know.
Yeah.
But God, I don't really enjoy it. It's like, it's sweaty.
Not gonna lie, it doesn't really look very pleasant either.
Thanks for being honest.
You're welcome.
Someone said today, I like your moustache. I'm like, no, you don't.
No, I think everyone looks really creepy during this time.
They do. Yeah. I feel creepy.
Yeah.
And yesterday I went down to my daughter's class as they asked me to be the mystery guest, where you go down and read a book.
Oh, and you read The Giving Tree, right?
How do you know that?
I saw
you were there.
yesterday.
Sorry, you forgot. I spoke to you. Sorry, the last 24 hours are a blur. And I'm reading the book, and they took a whole bunch of photos of me reading the book to the kids, and I just look like this really creepy French guy.
Yeah.
But even though I'm not French, I just look French. I had a striped shirt on and a moustache, reading books to kids, and it looks weird. And I'm like, my poor daughter's going to look back on that when she's older and go, oh, my dad looked creepy.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
I mean, I think for a good cause, it's pretty awesome, and I think its intent is to make people ask questions. So
for sure.
I think if that's what's happening, I think that's great. But I also think it could evolve in different ways as well. Maybe it's not as creepy.
Evolve in which way?
I don't know yet. Maybe it'll come to us one day.
What, the actual idea of Movember, or
no, just the creepiness factor.
The mistake.
There might be another way.
Yeah, that whole the whole men's health thing. Like, dudes are suffering.
Oh yeah.
You know, like, because again, I'm a health teacher. We used to I've actually looked at health statistics and stuff, and the stats are there. I mean, life expectancy for males are lower by about 10 years across the globe in every different country. You know, mental illness is way higher, suicide's higher, addiction problems are higher. You know, participation in violent crime higher, substance abuse of all kinds higher. I think dudes are really struggling in a lot of ways in that respect. I mean, prostate cancer rates as well.
Yeah.
Cancer rates in general. And I actually think there needs to be, it needs to be a little bit more of it, because I don't just see Movember as a male, like it's advocating for male health issues, but I actually think it's sort of advocating for issues of being an adult.
100%.
An adult human.
I think that we forget about the different struggles that each age group goes through. And I think that we have things in place for kids, but we don't necessarily have things in place for people who are coming out of being a teenager. And we don't have things in place for people coming out of their Saturn return. Going back to that, like when you leave your Saturn return, your life has been shifted and turned upside down. And, you know, learning how to deal with your emotions, learning how to be a communicator, learning how to deal with taxes and bills and responsibilities. Like, as much as we think that the kids are taking those things in school, a lot of times we're not teaching to that either. And, you know, the levels of responsibilities and priorities shift. And so we should, I mean, I'm an advocate for lifelong learning. So in every school, I think there should actually be adult education classes. I think there should be classes for parents. I think there should be classes for home ownership and for, you know, learning how to tap into the skills that you have as you become an adult, and learning how to interact in friend groups and, you know, like learning how to be a single person and learning how to be in a couple, or, you know, as we're getting into like different levels of partnerships and different types of partnerships, and with different sexual orientations and different sexual and gender identities, learning how to interact in the way that the world is changing. Like, the world changes all the time, and we don't necessarily always give ourselves the tools to engage with the world differently.
So well said, because being an adult is freaking hard.
Yeah.
And then if you have kids, it's even harder. And really, like, I've actually started needing my mother more, because I've got a stepfather as well, but I've started needing my parents more in my later years than I feel like I've ever have.
Yeah. Because
I'm just like, oh, dudes, mum, dad, my stepdad, Bob, I'm like, you got to give me some advice. Like, I don't know how to handle this adult situation, you know? And really, like, if you mess up as an adult, there's a lot less tolerance. I mean,
100%.
I mean, you go straight to jail if it's really bad. There's no, like, when you're a minor, you know, you get these, like, kind of
we don't
free
really
passes.
have restorative justice programs for adults. It's, you know, you have this
restorative
like
justice. Yeah,
we have these, like, you do something
zero
and
tolerance,
and then it's like when you reintegrate back into society, there's not a whole lot of opportunities. So then a lot of times you end up going back into the system.
Yeah. And then it's also like, if you mess up like on minor levels, you know, it's like, well, you're an adult, you should know better. Oh, it's like, should I? You know, and there's a lot of people, like, let's just say you don't have a strong family unit growing up, and you don't have strong adult role models, whether they're male or female. Where are you meant to develop the tools? And then often you'll go searching for the ones that are the most accessible, and sometimes they're not positive. They can be negative. And then that pain and that confusion and they can damage children. Adults damage children with the words they use, and then the cycle continues. I mean, it's big. Maybe too big.
Well, I think that we always have opportunities for growth, as we were talking about growth mindset earlier. And I think that, you know, we're in a really interesting point tipping point, I think, for education. And as people are thinking more and more about climate change, I think people are also starting to have that conversation about social emotional well-being and sustainability of self as well. And I think that if we can change the paradigm of education to reflect how to take care of ourselves and how to take care of the earth, then I think that we're going to look at a very different society, 20 to 50 years from now. But I think it means that people are a little bit, that means people push up against what we've been doing traditionally and really turn education on its head and, not look at education as a means for where students go when their parents are at work, Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it's like that saying, like, if you want to change the world, you got to start by changing yourself.
100%.
I think people are getting too caught up in some of the bigger picture stuff when they really need to focus on keeping their side of the street clean and cleaning up their business.
Yeah.
And I'm a health teacher, so I'm always going to go back to, I just really feel like personal health is the foundation of making global change. So the World Health Organization even identifies health of an individual as being 5-dimensional.
Yeah.
So it's social health, physical health, emotional health, cognitive health, and spiritual health.
Yeah.
And that for an individual to be holistically healthy, they have to have this even balance amongst the 5 dimensions.
Yeah.
And then, and I just feel like a lot of people are either neglecting one or they're neglecting numerous ones and focusing too much on one. And there's an imbalance. And then, you can't really then progress the world forward if you're, say, neglecting your, social health because you don't know how to develop good relationships. And that's going to help. That's going to... I don't know.
100%.
I just really feel like it does start with the individual, and I think we do get too caught up in the bigger picture. Not to say you're not meant to, but I think it is.
It's easy to get caught up in the material world and what is defined as success, and a lot of times that is having a strong cognitive. I guess balance. You really have a heavy cognitive intelligence, or you're really really physically fit, or you're meeting 2 of those different things, and that's what's going to bring you the money. Yeah. And so that's what's driving people a lot of times as well. And so I think it's really redefining what is success and what do we actually need to be happy. And I think it means people having more minimalist lifestyles, which then also turns the capitalist market on its head as well.
What do you think the true measure of a person's success is?
I think if you can live your life and look back on it and know that you've done good and that you maybe have struggled, but you have overcome those different struggles, and you have been able to grow from those experiences, then I think that you've been successful. And I think that if you can find happiness in the present moment, then you have been successful. Was there ever a stage in your life where you would have just defined success as owning a house and a car and a boat and stuff like that? I don't know. I think that I've always kind of known that success did not have to do with those things. But I think it's because my grandparents lived abroad most of their lives and never had a home. It wasn't until they were in their 50s that they bought their first house, and they lived kind of year to year in different countries, doing different jobs. That's so cool. And raising their kids with that mindset. And so, yes, most of my family now has homes and, lives very secure lifestyles. But I think that security in the way that we define it is very false because of natural disasters, because of, getting let go of a job that you didn't know was going to randomly fire you. Global financial crisis. Yeah, 100%. So I think that we give ourselves these false senses of security, and then we live to meet those security needs. And then we end up living a life that we weren't actually enjoying. We weren't present for, because we keep putting off and bookmarking, I'll go there when I have this in place. I'll do this when I have this in place. And I think that that's you're really cheating yourself of being able to experience life. Definitely you need to save, and definitely you need to take care of yourself and your family, but you also need to make sure that you don't know how long your life is going to be. And so to think that you're going to be able to live to 60 with all this money that you're saving, what is that going to look like when money isn't a factor anymore? When we're living in Bitcoin life, or some new thing has been created. And I just think that again, there's an imbalance.
Yeah. Did you ever read that? I don't know if you'd call it a manifesto or just a piece of writing by Stephen Jobs before he died.
Mm-mm.
It was really cool. He wrote I guess an essay on life.
Okay.
When he was in the depths of his terminal illness.
Mm-hmm.
And there was no solution. He was going to die, and he'd accepted that he was going to die, and it all was just like, I mean, he's one of the richest, he died one of the richest people in the planet's ever seen, obviously. And also successful. Like, I respect his creativity, for what he did. It was very, very artistic, really. But the whole premise of the essay was... Take away my Ferraris, and I was just as happy with my $20,000 car, as opposed to my, $200,000 car and things like that. And I know these things. I do. I know that there's no happiness there, but I still can't. I do see myself gravitating towards. Well, I've just got to make sure I own the house because it's got to be secure. And even though I don't really. I might not want to even live in that area for the rest of my life, but I've got to go and overcommit myself financially to a bank that's actually charging me money to give me the money, and then I'll end up paying them back almost as much as they've given me over the course. It just doesn't seem right. And it also seems unfair that I have to give money back for being given money so I can house my family. I mean, I know it's a deep topic and conversation, but maybe I'm having a midlife crisis too.
I think it's, again, going back to what we were talking about earlier about moving from a scarcity mindset. And I think that we learn certain tactics as we're growing up to learn how to survive. And I think that when you have the things that you need to survive, you don't forget those survival tactics. So you still live your life in that survival mentality and that scarcity mindset versus realizing okay, I'm not thinking about where my next meal is coming from every day. I'm not actually struggling to survive. I'm thriving, but I still have that scarcity mindset. And it's learning how to move into the abundance mindset and know that your needs are taken care of.
You're going to be okay.
And you're going to be okay. And even if you do meet hardship, that you're resilient enough to make it through. And that you're that struggle is not going to kill you.
Yeah. And changing your mindset in regards to the journey of life. Because the journey of life I've had up until, for most of my life, is the one that was pushed upon me and programmed into me. Get educated, get up a decent salary, buy stuff, get in debt.
Well, and they talk about it as the matrix being, it once it's created, it kind of continues on by itself because it's so powerful and its messaging is so influential, and it's really true, and it's you kind of have to get yourself out of the matrix in order to enjoy life for what it is, which sometimes can be a little bit more scary because you don't know what's coming next, and that you no longer think that sense of security is real. That no matter what, anything can happen, and so you're living kind of almost more in a state of chaos, but you're no longer afraid of it.
That's great. I lived in a state of chaos for years, and by traditional standards, and I was scared a lot, to be honest. But then I got the security that I thought I desired, and I still have it in a lot of ways. I won't go into why. And no happier. I was no happier. I'm no happier than I was going back. In fact, in some ways, those things have made me unhappier and caused me a lot of sleepless nights and stress.
It's more baggage to worry about, because then it's more things that you're worried about losing. So instead of worrying about getting it, now you're worried about losing it. When I was a kid, one of my favorite things about Christmas wasn't actually the presents that we got. Because after my mom got a divorce, she was working multiple jobs and she didn't really have a whole lot of money. And so what we would do is she would wait until Christmas Eve and she would decorate the house while we were sleeping with stuff we already had, but she would use that opportunity to really make it like a magical wonderland that we would wake up to. And then our presents were, new pajamas and cinnamon rolls. And we were so delighted and happy to wake up to that magic. And that was what I really enjoyed. And it wasn't about the money that we had or the new toys or the new shoes or the new technology. It was literally having that moment of joy when we woke up. And I remember when I learned that Santa Claus wasn't real, instead of it like being a detrimental thing, she actually allowed me to be in on the magic giving with her. So then I would help her decorate for my sisters. And so it's like that
so you have
is
good
the
memories.
joy. Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, I would say that I grew up really happy. Like I remember going to guidance counselors in school and sharing about my life and them kind of looking at me a little bit funny, like, you seem like you're having like a hard life, but you have a smile on your face, or you're laughing, or it's like a joke. And it wasn't that it was funny. It was just that I was finding moments of joy and being present in those moments. Mm-hmm.
Oh, so good. So good. I've actually been learning a lot because I've got 2 little kids, and I've actually been doing some reading and I'll be open. I'm delving into my childhood and how some of the experiences you have as a child, from the age of like 2 to 10, how much they impact on you as an adult, and the tools that you develop for survival. And yeah, like I'll be honest with you, like I've carried hurt from my childhood, and then used those survival tools as an adult, and then it just doesn't work because you're an adult. And it's like when you are young, and like you were talking about your mother creating this experience for you, like that's now ingrained in your mind. And your reflections upon your childhood, like I can see even the way you expressed it was immediate happiness, and that can maybe set you up for a life of happiness because of that. And it's so delicate. It just spins me out sometimes at how sensitive it can be. And I take it more serious than ever, And going back to the Christmas stuff too, I remember like my kids at Christmas time by the grandparents, and they can't help it, and I get it. They just spoil them rotten. But I watched them opening these presents Christmas morning, and it's just like rip the paper, look at this object for a minute, chuck it. What's the next thing? And it's just give me more. And I'm like, what are we teaching them? You know? And then there's always like a behavioural issue that morning or that afternoon because they've just been so overstimulated and then completely unsatisfied. And they're not being enriched by the experience. It's not about the stuff. It's about the experience. And so I love that story you told about your mum. It's great. Anyway, well, look, how you feeling?
I'm feeling good. Yeah.
It's been epic. Like, how long have we been? It's been 1 hour and 51 minutes, Esther.
Nice.
Where does the time go?
Yeah.
I've got one last question for you.
Okay.
Where, with your writing, I definitely get the impression that you are writing because you want to inspire and you want to, maybe help others indirectly. Because what the theme that I think has come out through our conversation, and actually me knowing you, is you're very much a humanitarian. You empathise deeply with people, and I can tell you want to help. What other end goals, if any, or goals in general, do you have for your writing journey?
That's a good question. Thank you. I guess for my writing journey, I would like to be able to use those skills that I have, both the creativity and like the professionalism I have in education, to create a curriculum or create like a blueprint for micro schools, and to really help people learn how to unlock creativity both on levels for students and children, but also for adults, and really kind of give a blueprint for how to have those conversations and how to facilitate communities that impact change and actually allow us to, be our most authentic selves and be creating communities that actually work and that are compassionate and that care about each other.
Nice.
Yeah.
Communities that work. Is there an end game in that?
I mean, I guess if my writing can help impact that kind of change, or even just help people realize that they can be a part of that change, then I feel like that I'll be doing what I feel like is,
you're doing your part.
Right. Yeah, that's all I can do.
Yeah. Sometimes the futility of it just overwhelms me and I just want to bury my head in the sand.
Yeah.
But what sort of life is that if you if you bury your life in the sand?
Well, I think there was one moment when Lo and I and my sister Zuri, we were in New York, and it was when Lo and I were on our wedding tour, and we were in the Verizon phone. It's a mobile phone company in America. We were in the store trying to get SIM cards for our phone, and we were just talking to the lady. We didn't know her, she was just the lady who was giving us our SIM cards, and we all just were laughing and having joy, and we were just enjoying ourselves. We were just having so much fun, and there was a guy sitting behind us that we didn't really notice, and he was like, this is what life is all about. Keep doing that. Keep having those moments. And we weren't even talking to him, but we affected his life, and we brought joy to his day.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the thing that we don't know is, like, in those moments where things feel like we're crawling to get there, you don't know who's watching you. You don't know who is being inspired by your hardships and who is actually needing to be reminded that it's okay to put your head down and to rest, but it's also okay to put your head up and to hope. And so I think that it's just, we're all affecting each other all the time.
Yeah, and we all have value.
Mm-hmm.
We all do.
Yeah.
Even when you think you don't.
Yeah.
Even if you have had an horrendous life,
mm-hmm.
you actually have value, because there might be someone out there who needs to hear about that. And then that's going to help them. So you have the capacity to help.
We're all radiating breadcrumbs, and we just don't know who is picking those up, right? And I think
true.
It's when we're trying to manipulate how it is done, that's when we struggle. Yeah. But if you just allow yourself to be doing what you're doing and trust that the right people are going to hear it, and the right people that need to hear it when they need to hear it are going to hear it, then yeah.
You're right.
Yeah.
We've got no control over this crazy world.
Not at all.
We've got no control.
It's not up to us.
It's not. Well, Esther, thanks so much for talking to me.
Yeah, thanks for creating this platform.
And I've really enjoyed it, and you've put on this nice spread. I've been I haven't had olives in ages. I've been sitting here picking at the olives, and are they prunes?
Oh yeah, they're prunes because it was to help me with my digestion when I was back from the hospital. Great. Which they don't tell you about that, by the way.
Yeah, with some of the painkillers and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, make sure that you are taking things to help you soften your stool, not just get it out.
Don't get me started about digestive health and gut health. Oh my God, that's a whole other podcast we can talk about. Well, it's linked. They're calling it. They're calling it the second brain, the old digestive tracts and the old intestines.
It's where our intuition lives.
This is great. Look, it's Friday afternoon.
Yep.
And let's
so
call
much,
it a high five.
Yeah.
You're the best.
Woo!
All right. You have a great weekend. You're a legend.
Thank you.